This video is sponsored by Wing Technology, your ultimate flight sim hardware solution.
Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing very well. Today's valued viewer request is from an unpronounceable name. We also want a video about the destruction of the Israeli destroyer Eilat. Sorry for pronunciation, that's just how I've always called it. And this is a really interesting piece of history that I would love to talk about. So, as briefly as I can, this destroyer started life as a World War II British destroyer, and it served well in World War II. In 1955, it was sold on to the Israelis. In 1967, under Israeli command, after the Six-Day War, she was sailing in international waters off Port Said in the Sinai, hit by 3 Soviet Styx missiles, these are anti-shipping missiles launched by Egyptian missile boats. An Egyptian Komar-class missile boat positioned within the harbour at Port Said fired 2 missiles at the Israeli destroyer. Eilat's radar did not reveal any suspicious activity or movements because the Egyptians launched the missiles from within the port. Eilat's captain ordered evasive action when the missiles were detected by radar, but the first missile hit the ship just above the waterline at local 5:32 p.m. 2 minutes later, the second missile struck, causing additional casualties. While Eilat began to list heavily, the crew tended to the wounded and engaged in rescue and repair operations while waiting for additional ships of the Israeli Navy to come to their rescue. But around an hour later, another Egyptian Komar-class missile boat from Port Said fired 2 more Styx missiles at Eilat. The third missile hit Eilat amidships, causing more damage and further fires, while the fourth went astray and crashed in the water nearby. Eilat sank about 2 minutes later. Out of a crew of 199, 47 were killed and more than 100 wounded. And why is this engagement so important? It's the first time in the history of the world that anti-ship missiles were used to sink a hostile vessel. The sinking just months after the defeat in the Six-Day War caused brief jubilation in the Arab world, and crowds gathered to cheer the 2 missile boats upon their return to Port Said. In Israel, angry crowds surrounded Chief of Staff Yitzhak Rabin, and newspaper editorials demanded vengeance. 67 hours after the attack, Israel retaliated by shelling Port Suez with heavy mortars. 2 of the site's 3 oil refineries were destroyed, with the smallest one left standing. The refineries produced all of Egypt's cooking and heating gas and 80% of its oil. Other areas of the city were hit. Israel ignored or pleaded technical difficulties to the UN requests for the ceasefire. The Soviet Union, who were allied with Egypt or supporting Egypt, sent 7 warships on a courtesy call to Egyptian ports to dissuade Israel from further attacks. The sinking of Eilat to surface missiles inaugurated a new era in the development of naval weapons and the formulation of naval strategy throughout the world. Though not highly publicized at the time, the sinking had a considerable impact on the Israeli Navy. Israel started to develop plans for German-influenced ship designs better suited to missile combat, principally small and efficient boats armed with missiles able to patrol Israeli shores and undertake offshore operations at high speed, while at the same time able to evade enemy tracking and missiles. The resulting focus on new, more agile missile-armed boats would reap major benefits for the Israeli Navy 6 years later during the Yom Kippur War, which we'll be covering shortly. And more interesting follow-ups to this, as this sinking happened, I think it was either 4 or 6 of Israel's first missile boats were being built in France. And if you want an interesting story, go and see how those boats were smuggled out of France. And if you want an even more interesting story, on board one of those missile boats were the stolen plans of the Mirage 5 from the Dassault factory, which leads to the story of the formulation of the Kafir, based on the Mirage 5 built by Israel. Incredibly interesting piece of history, all that stuff linked together. In terms of geography, the thing to remember when looking at traditional world affairs is how close Israel and Egypt are. Well, they're basically joined on. This is the southern half of Israel here. Here's the Sinai here. Here's Egypt here. Here's Port Said there. And Eilat was somewhere around here. And the scale from there to about there, I believe, is about 100 nautical miles. So in conflict terms, these are relatively small distances. So let's go and reenact.